Last month, the man was charged with the attempted murder of a Supreme Court justice after calling the police on himself for his murderous thoughts and being detained near the home of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And on July 9th, Seattle police arrested a armed man with a gun outside of Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal's home. According to the Seattle Times, a neighbor told police she heard the man shouting, quote, "Go back to India, I'm going to kill you." And another reported seeing the suspect drive past Jayapal's house 3 times while shouting profanities. Joining me now is Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, chair of the Progressive Caucus. Congresswoman Jayapal, thank you very much for coming back to the Sunday show. I am sorry to hear about what happened to you. How are you and your family?
Jonathan, thank you. This is the first time I'm talking about this, and I appreciate you having me on to talk about not only what happened to me, but the connections to exactly what you were just starting the opening with. I am not okay, and I'm okay. I think, this is a scary time for me and for my family. This man is, the investigation is ongoing, and there are still charges that need to be filed, evidence that needs to be collected. But the reality is, this was not a coincidence. It is not a coincidence that he targeted a prominent woman of color who has been on the front lines of fighting for a just and equitable society and has been fighting against white supremacy and racism. And I think it is also I think it's noteworthy that this was not about a particular vote. If you look at the incredible anger and hatred and listen to the tapes, because there is some video footage of this or some audio footage of this that the police have, the vitriol and hatred that were directed at me as he screamed so loudly that everybody on our street could hear it. And the fact that he has been stalking me for many months, as we found out. These incidents have been happening over several months. We didn't know it was the same person. But then, of course, on the night of the incident, which just continued to escalate, showing up at my house with a gun and screaming about going back to India and threats against my life. This man wanted to intimidate me. He wanted to threaten me. He wanted to harm me. And I think it is just important to understand that this violence has been unleashed. It's not that racism and white supremacy haven't existed in our country, Jonathan. You know that very, very well. But what has happened is that the person that occupied the White House, the highest office in the land, actually used and unleashed and mobilized all of that violence and white supremacy using the tools of the federal government, using bans on Muslims, bans on trans folks, calling out people to be racist, working with the most racist, white supremacist, violent extremist groups, including the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, and then, of course, using lies and misinformation, disinformation to try to steal an election and stage a coup. So I feel like the violence that's directed particularly at us as people of color and very prominent, outspoken people of color who are fighting for justice in our country is really a consequence of all of that.
Congresswoman, it is chilling to hear the news that you just said that this same person has been stalking you for months now. That man was released on Wednesday. Why weren't they able to hold him?
Well, they have 72 hours after they arrest somebody to be able to file the charges. And I am firmly, I believe, maybe because I need to believe, that the prosecutors will be able to charge him. I think it would be a terrible, terrible sign, not just to me, but to elected officials across the country, if they are not able to arrest him and charge him with what the Seattle police detectives actually recommended in their probable cause statement. the police department, you don't have to believe me, the police department detective actually recommended charges of stalking and felony harassment. So they needed, I guess, to be able to have more information, more data than what they had to be sure that they could make those charges hold up. And I am hoping, Jonathan, that that they are going to pursue this. You and I know that people get held for a lot less than what I see happened here. So I'm going to continue to push hard to make sure that these charges do get filed. And I think it's important to know also, Jonathan, that one of the things that we were able to do because of Washington state law, red flag laws, is we did get an extreme risk protection order, which removed not only the gun that he was carrying, which was a Glock, with a round in the chamber at the time. And I believe I heard what really could have been a racking of that round in the chamber on some of the audio tape. But I think that it's important to know that we were able to get a extreme risk protection order because we have that law in the state. We passed it statewide. And so that gun was removed from him, as well as another gun that he had access to in his family's home was also removed. So at least he does not have weapons. But let's be clear that this is very different from protests or threats, which we get to our office, unfortunately, all the time, on the phone, you know, people saying really quite hateful things. I've had protests in front of my house. This is entirely different. And this level of violence and the vitriol and the hate, which he was screaming things that I can't repeat on your air because you would have to bleep them out, were racist, they were sexist, they were xenophobic, and they were designed to intimidate, threaten, and of course with the weapon, I believe, to harm me and my family.
Congresswoman, one last question before I let you go. Considering everything that you've just said and the fact that he has been released, not trying to get you to compromise your security at all, but are you at home or have you gone elsewhere?
I am not at home right now. I am traveling, and I will be in D.C. this week. But I expect that when I go home, I expect the Capitol Police and the Seattle Police Department and the prosecutor's office will all take my safety very seriously. I intend to. But I hope that charges will be filed soon. And at the end of the day, Jonathan, we have to take away the tools that racist, white supremacist extremists are using. And as Dr. King said, you cannot regulate morality, but you can legislate behavior. And we have to do that. We cannot make it so easy for people to get guns and for people to carry out these violent threats against people as all part of what this country has come to be under 6 years post Donald Trump.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington, thank you very much for coming to the Sunday show. Please, you and your family, stay safe.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I'm going to bring in Myles Taylor, former Chief of Staff of the Department of Homeland Security and co-founder and executive director of the Renew America movement. Myles, thank you very much for coming to the Sunday show. Just your reaction to what you heard from Congresswoman Jayapal.
Well, she started off that segment by saying, I'm okay and I'm not okay. Yeah. And I think that's what the country can be saying right now. We're lucky not to have had one of these episodes and tragically, but it's not okay. And we're not okay. And I would say right now, bottom line up front, the light is blinking red right now in this country when it comes to political violence. When I look at all the indicators, and I'm awash with data on this, it is a very, very terrifying moment. And I've talked to a lot of experts recently, nonpartisan experts, who worry we're entering that red zone for potential political assassinations. That sounds like hyperbole, but just in the past 2 years, Jonathan, we've seen threats against American governors, American members of Congress. The Vice President of the United States had people calling for his assassination on January 6th. I worry right now that this is a ticking time bomb. On most things, I don't say that there's inevitability. On most things, when it comes to national security, I always say we have a choice and the ability to mitigate them. But I think we're past the period where we have a choice of dialing this down and avoiding at least low-level sustained political violence. We've gotten past that period, and I think it's a big concern for national security.
So then how do we dial it down? I mean, to my mind, one way to dial it down is if Republican leaders stepped out on a consistent basis and said, this is not who we are. We will not stand for this. We need to come together. Let's lower the temperature. Am I asking too much?
It's absolutely what should happen, but it's also what should have happened 6 years ago. We started to see this at the beginning of the Trump administration. When I was at his Department of Homeland Security, as the head of counterterrorism policy in the front office there, we saw in the first year of the Trump administration the indicators about potential domestic terrorism ticking up, and it was clear that primarily at that time it was coming from the right. When we pressed the White House to do something, the White House had no interest. In fact, the president's advisors saw these people not as domestic violent extremists, but as his supporters, and they politicized it. The consequences of those decisions from several years ago are now manifesting themselves in real time with these threats we're seeing, whether they're to figures on the left or the political right.
Myles Taylor, some sobering news on a Sunday morning, sobering thoughts. Thank you very much for coming to the Sunday Show.
Thanks, Jonathan.